Thank you for listening to Organic News here on Awake Radio, where we try to give you news that is organic. Thank you for tuning in again to this Tuesday's edition of Awake Radio here on Organic News. And I want to express my thrill to have this guest with us. I focus a lot, mostly week after week, on a lot of political, economic issues, and I try to incorporate my passion for natural healing and health that I've been paying attention to and knowing is at the root of so many of our issues. And we have with us tonight Anodea Judith. Dr. Anodea Judith, PhD, has been called the prophet of our time, a groundbreaking thought leader who is the founder and director of Sacred Centers, a writer, therapist, and spiritual teacher. Her passion for the realization of human potential matches her concern for humanity's impending crisis. Her fervent wish is that we wake up in time. She holds a master's and doctoral degrees in psychology and human health, 500-hour registered yoga teacher, yay, my passions, with lifelong studies of psychology, mythology, sociology, history, systems theory, mystic spirituality. She is considered one of the country's foremost experts on the combination of chakras and therapeutic issues, and on the interpretation of the chakra system for the Western lifestyle. She teaches across the United States as well as in Canada, Europe, Ireland, Asia, South and Central America. So Anodea, thank you so much for being able to be here on Awake Radio this Tuesday, June 3rd.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for asking me. I'd love to talk about.
Yeah. I read your Wheels of Life book a long time ago, at least 10 or plus years ago, and also your other book, Eastern Body, Western Mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually, I've misplaced them or given them away because I moved around so much. But there's certain things in particular that I've, downloaded into my system from those books that I would like to discuss. But first, I just wanted to ask you about the course that you're giving now. You're actually in the midst of giving, what is it, a 7-month
course.
Yeah, right. It was 7-month course. Okay, just tell us what that is all about.
Well, it's a 7-month online course with 2 calls for each month. And of course, 1 month is on each chakra. So we spend 1 month on the first chakra, 1 month on the second chakra. I've actually been doing this for years, but this time it's online, enabling people to take it from a long way off. Plus, they get emails once a week about various practices for the body, the psyche, the spirit, and for activism. But what's unique about this course is each student gets a private coaching therapy session once each month. So for each chakra, they get to work on their own particular issues, and that enhances what they're learning. So it's a very comprehensive course, and we just finished up 5th chakra, and we're about to go into the 6th chakra. So we're almost through.
So tell, for people who aren't aware of what chakras are.
Well, my definition is that they are centers of organization for the reception, the assimilation, and the expression of life force energy. I think of them as chambers in the temple of the body, and the word chakra literally means wheel or disc. So they're like a spinning vortex of energy in the subtle body. But I think of them as actual places in the body, like I say, chambers. And just like the chambers in your home receive energy, they use it and they send it back out again. Your kitchen receives food and processes food, and then you take out the garbage. The chakras do the same thing in the temple of the body.
Are they located in the nervous system? I was always under that impression.
Well, they are said to be in the subtle body, which is a body of subtle energy that we can feel, like You can often feel your first chakra when you stand on the edge of a cliff, or a tall building, and you feel that shaky feeling right between your legs. That's your first chakra. So it's a subtle energy. And they do map onto the central nervous system, however, because we have 7 nerve ganglia branching out from the spinal column that coordinate to the chakras.
And there are 7 altogether, right?
Well, different systems give different numbers. There are 7 major chakras, and the 7 major chakras describe a very elegant spiritual system. I've read accounts of, New Age people that write about even 33 chakras, but I think it just confuses the fact that this is a very elegant spiritual system.
And can you, as briefly or as lengthy as you can, just describe like each of the chakras and when they are in like a deficiency or an excess?
Yeah, well, people always talk about opening their chakras, and I say, well, it's not quite that simple. Some chakras are already too open, and they're
right.
An excessive focus in that chakra, and some chakras are closed, and I call that deficient. So as we go through the 7 chakras from base to crown, chakra 1 is at the base of the spine, the tailbone, the coccygeal plexus, if you want to talk about the nerve ganglion. And relates to our ground. It's the element earth. So it's our ability to be embodied, to be in the here and now, to be grounded and focused and take care of the nuts and bolts of life. And when that chakra is excessive, then we have too heavy a body. We put on weight and we may be attached to possessions. It's like we're too heavy, too much earth energy.
Yeah,
when it's deficient, we're, up in our heads, we're spacey, we're too thin, we can't ground, we're restless, we're vague, we're not really present. That's a deficient first chakra.
Right.
So we balance those out.
Okay, so from what you just said, it just made me kind of, because I always think that in this global earth that we all share, that we're all kind of mirroring one another. And what has been coming up, like since I left the Omega Institute, for the last 4 years or so, especially, I've just been doing like a lot of activism and filming and documenting a lot of the protests and things with the Occupy movement and closing Guantanamo and, the whole gap of the inequality that has, more and more people are starting to address. And so the haves and the have-nots. So we're, the extreme rich and the extreme poor and starving of the world are basically just mirroring one another's excesses and deficiencies.
You could say that. What I say is that our cultural damage, collective damage to the first chakra has created an environmental crisis, a financial crisis, and a healthcare crisis. And, the health of all 3 systems is failing. We no longer have a healthy financial system because, as you say, it profits the rich and robs the poor. And, we have a small percentage of very rich people and a huge percentage of very poor people, and it's getting worse. Exactly. So we don't have a healthy financial system. We don't have a healthy environment. We're destroying the planet. And, the reason healthcare is such an issue is because, we're all getting sick. No one's saying, well, how do we, why are we getting sick? They're just saying, how do we pay for more and more elaborate measures to keep us healthy while we pollute the world? So these are all first chakra issues in the world.
Right. So I want you to finish going through the rest of the chakras. Like I don't want to interrupt because we just got to the first one.
Right. If we do that, we'll never get through all of them. Okay. The second chakra is located in the abdomen and the sexual organs, the hips, the small of the back, the sacrum. And it's the element water, and it's related to emotions and sexuality and sensation and the ability to move freely and gracefully. And when the second chakra is deficient, we are out of touch with our feelings. We may be numb or just shut down emotionally or sexually. When it's excessive, then someone may be too much in their emotions. They're just super angry one day and they're crying the next, and they're just so overly emotional, or they might be overly sexual, or they might be so sensation oriented that they need to eat or do this all the time to always stimulate their sensations. That would be an excess. And again, we want a balance.
Right.
As the element water, that relates to the waters in the world. Water is a big issue in the world and becoming a more major issue even than oil or land. So, the waters of the second chakra have been very blocked for a long time by various religions and misinterpretations. And so there's a lot of work to reclaim that chakra.
Okay. Again, it's like I'm tempted to just really start asking you a whole bunch of questions, but I want to just make sure that you get through all of the chakras.
Yeah. Well, you might just jot down your questions and we'll come back to it. So we have earth for the first chakra, water for the second, and then the third chakra we go up to the element fire. And this chakra is located in the solar plexus. It rules our digestive fire, which gives us energy. And from that energy, we take action. This is where we have the right to act. This is, focused on what do we do, and how much energy we have, how much fire we have, and ultimately our sense of personal power, our self-esteem. In fact, our sense of a separate self is very third chakra oriented, and it's often called the power chakra. So when it's deficient, you have your passive, weak victim that doesn't know what they want and, just goes along with the program and, just feels victimized. And on the excessive side, you have your bully, your power over person, your power abuser, or your control freak, somebody that needs to be in control all the time. Those would all be excessive third chakras. Even excessive doing, which a lot of us fall into, or constantly doing. Yeah. And as I say, that gets us into deep doo-doo. That gets us exhausted after a while, and then the excessive third chakra can become deficient.
Right. Okay, so now we're up to number 4.
Which is the heart chakra.
Yeah.
The heart chakra is the middle chakra in a system of 7. There's 3 chakras above and 3 chakras below, and it's related to the element air. And it is, of course, related to the heart, being related to love, relationships, compassion, forgiveness, generosity, all the things that are related to the heart chakra. And an internal spaciousness that comes from the breath, which is air, of course, bringing air into the body. When the heart chakra is deficient, well, we close down our heart, we isolate, we criticize, we judge, we're not compassionate or even cruel, and that's a very shut down heart chakra, and we're also not very happy. When the heart chakra is open, we're loving and compassionate and generous, but it can be too open, and that kind of person is sort of your classic codependent. They give everything away. They don't have any boundaries. They're always in everybody else's space. They don't know where their own center is, so they can be meddlesome, codependent, needing attention all the time. That would be an excessively focused heart chakra.
Yeah.
And then we go from there up to the throat chakra, chakra number 5, whose name is Vishuddha, which means purification. And as you might imagine with the throat, it's related to communication, to creativity, self-expression. And, excessive and deficient in this chakra is pretty obvious. You have the person who can hardly open up their voice, and they talk in a little tiny voice like this. Or, they're quiet all the time, or they're very nervous when they speak. That's a very shut down 5th chakra. Or the person who's a motor mouth and talks all the time, nonstop, or very loud, or gossiping. That type of person would be an excessive 5th chakra. Or like I say, sometimes they write very long books and teach all-day workshops and talk all the time. which is myself, of course. I've never had trouble getting my words out. I always have had a lot to say.
Oh, yeah, good for you.
So then chakra 6, the brow chakra, is related to the element light. Chakra 5 is related to sound. Chakra 6 is related to the element light, and it's through light that we see. And it is through seeing that we bring the outside world in. We have information, and we have the seat of wisdom, insight, intuition, our psychic faculties, our dreams.
And that's the third eye chakra, right?
That's the third eye chakra, absolutely. Yeah, chakra 6. Its name is Ajna, which means to perceive and to command.
And that's the pineal gland.
That's right, which hangs down right in the middle of the brain. Like if you drilled from right to left and front to back, and where those lines crossed, that would be where the 6th chakra is located, really in line with your core. And when deficient, this chakra is very shut down, and people have no imagination, and they don't really see what's going on, and they don't have much insight into themselves, and they may be attached to the one true right and only way and think they know everything. And when there's there's a lot of that going around, isn't there? A lot of people who just haven't awakened this chakra. And on the excessive side, this is the type of person that, sometimes I meet at New Age fairs that is just taking in every little psychic phenomenon. They say, oh, yes, you were my mother in a past life, and space aliens are going to land on the White House lawn, and I got this message from my guides, and, they're just so wide open, there's no filter. That would be an excessive 6th chakra.
Right. Okay, so right.
Then,
now
we get the crown chakra at the top of the head, relating to the cerebral cortex and our ability to think and have advanced consciousness. And this chakra is related to consciousness itself. And the great beyond, it's related to spirit, to the cosmos, to universal intelligence. And it is our raw awareness and our ability to think and analyze and remember and process and simply to be aware. And when it's deficient, then we're spiritually shut down. We have no connection with the greater beyond. We have no connection with spirit, with God, goddess, whatever you want to call something larger, with grace. And again, we may think we know it all and be very narrow-minded. When this chakra is excessive, then that can be a person who lives in their head, and they're always in their thinking mind and not in their body.
Right.
They can be addicted to their spirituality. I've seen a lot of that. And they can be, kind of out there, because this chakra definitely takes you out there. But if it's excessive, then people kind of get stuck out there. They're kind of your more fringe type of people. But a lot of mystics and yogis have a very strong 7th chakra. Which is no problem if you have open lower chakras to balance it out.
Right. And is there one more that kind of is above the top of the head? Or?
Well, I don't really think so. People often say the 8th chakra, and some people say the 9th, and some people say the 12th. There's not really anything about that in the old literature. I like that. In fact, many of the old literature only talk about 6 centers, with the 7th being consciousness itself, but not really a chakra or a center.
Okay, if I could, I just wanted to say this because it came to my mind as I was listening to you. So, one thing that I feel like is a really important thing to just put out there is that, this is not about like bashing yourself, because,
No.
you know what I mean? Because if the whole point of looking at all of this stuff and looking at your imbalanced chakras is not to be chastising of oneself or to be like criticizing, because that's kind of what would be sort of, self-defeating. The whole point is to just look at, at issues so that we can, change it and make it better and heal ourselves and be more in alignment with the earth.
Well, the issue really is awareness. And
Right.
chakra system is a map to the architecture of the soul. And if you were going to drive from California to New York, you would want a map.
Right.
And the map just gives you guidance on where to go. It doesn't tell you where to go. And if you want to take a detour to Chicago or Houston, the map doesn't tell you you're right or wrong, but it just says, here's the highways that get you there. So the chakra system is a map to the soul. And, we're all trying to figure out what this world is about and to heal ourselves and figure out how to do life. I mean, wouldn't it be nice if somebody gave you a map?
Right.
Well, the chakra system is that map.
Can I ask you, does the earth have chakras?
Well, people always ask me that, and a lot of people talk about it. And I think that that's not really an understanding of what chakras are so much. If the earth had chakras at all, it would be more like layers.
Right.
The crust and the rocks and the dirt would be chakra 1, and the oceans would be chakra 2, and the energies of the life is chakra 3, and the atmosphere is chakra 4, and the vibrations are chakra 5, and the light is chakra 6, and the consciousness is chakra 7. But it's not like Hawaii is a chakra or New York is a chakra.
Right. Right. The earth itself. Exactly. The anatomy of the earth, I guess.
Yeah, it has different layers.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you about money. Like, how does money fit into all of this with all the economic problems that we are having in the world? And, over the last few years, I spent my whole life, like I just turned 50 like a couple of months ago, and my whole entire life, like when I was young up until just like a few years ago, I was completely dedicated to like therapy, yoga, meditation, and all of that stuff. And it's so strange because all the things that everyone is talking about now with the economy and the financial situation, they're saying all the things that I was saying when I was talking about and focusing on health and yoga and all that stuff. It's like people are really realizing what has real wealth. And so what I've basically learned about the monetary system is that it's not even real. They create it out of fractional reserve lending, which is the banks literally make money, that doesn't even exist.
They make money loaning money that doesn't even exist.
And the Federal Reserve, right? I mean, they add digital entries, like they just add zeros in a digital entry. I mean, if any of us did this, we would be arrested for,
Right.
for crimes and put in jail forever.
Right.
So, right. So this diversion, it's taking us away, because everybody, we need money. We have to have it. And
That's
so
it. I mean, ideally, eco means home. It's how we balance the physical needs of the home. And, economy once upon a time was simply how we traded, food and land and lumber and things like that. And now, with the financial system, it's all representational. Money represents so many board feet of lumber. It represents so many hours of childcare. It represents, so many stocks in a company. But it's so removed now from the actual thing. Charles Eisenstein, who wrote Sacred Economics, says that, of any real thing, you can reach a point of satiation, which means you've had enough food, you're full, you push yourself away from the table, you have enough clothes in your closet, you can't even fit anymore, you've got enough. But with money, because it represents something, you can never get enough.
right.
And this insatiability drives people to have more and more and more. And unfortunately, the system that does that more often than not means other people have less and less. And the debt system that we have created means that for every time money is loaned, more money has to be paid back. And ultimately, that comes out of the environment. Ultimately, we're robbing the earth of its resources The earth is our warehouse, and we keep selling what's in the warehouse without restocking the warehouse. And, if we think that the financial crisis a few years ago was bad, when the warehouse runs out, there's no bailout that's going to fix that.
I actually, made up a term for this excess, because exactly like you just described, I always used to like try to tell people that, the body can only process so much, right? If you eat too much, you get fat. If you have too much money, that's not, more is not always better. And so it's like being financially morbidly obese is kind of, this term that I just sort of see.
If you think of it as a whole, as a systemic thing, then money ideally the economy should be a circulation. It's like circulation of blood in the body.
Exactly.
Now, in your body, your blood needs to get oxygen to each and every cell in order to be healthy, all the way down to your toes and fingertips.
Exactly.
So if one part of your body, let's say your left shoulder, said, well, I'm more important and I'm going to steal all the money and take it out of circulation, and your feet aren't going to get any,
exactly.
we call that a blood clot. We call that an aneurysm. And, when somebody has a situation, they're not long for this world. And so in the culture, we have a block in the circulation where it's pooling in certain places and not getting distributed to other places that need it. And that means the system as a whole is getting unhealthy.
And so in our society that we live in the global world that we live in, money, profit comes from separation. People constantly create like conflict and wars and separation and racism and all kinds of things, for profit.
Well, I would say separation. Yeah, I would say it does come from separation, and our basic belief or story or model of separation from the universe creates an insatiable hunger, and that is what drives the financial system. And, it's the sense that things are not connected, and what we do here has no effect on the people of India. That's an illusion from which we are going to awaken one of these days and have a rude awakening. It's an illusion that's creating a nightmare. What I say that every person trying to get simply their personal dream creates a collective nightmare.
Right. Okay. Let's go. So, a lot of what, we talked about the excesses and the deficiencies in the chakras. They definitely describe a lot of what's happening in the world. Like, people being spiritually shut down. Like sometimes like in this world of money and people just trying to kind of, get, what they can get for themselves, and being sort of disconnected from the fact that there is a spirit, like there is another, I just call it like natural law, something just higher, like a higher frequency. And the fact that we live in this man-made habitat, cities and buildings and offices, and we're being so cut off from nature and how nature works.
Exactly. In my book, The Global Heart Awakens, the subtitle is Humanity's Rite of Passage from the Love of Power to the Power of Love. And I look through history at how did we get into this mess. And, when we first started living in cities and defending ourselves from invading tribes, we built walls around our cities and we started to wall out nature. And now, today, the average person lives within walls 90 to 95% of their time.
Yeah.
Even this weekend, I had a party, and it was supposed to be a garden party, and I worked really hard outside in my garden to have people outside. Everybody showed up, and they stayed in, and they were indoors. And I was like, what are you doing indoors? It's a beautiful day. We have a garden. We're so used to being within walls, and in walls we live with our consciousness separated from nature.
We just had in New York over this past weekend, it's called the Left Forum. They have it in New York City every year, and this year it was at John Jay. And there's panels, people do a lot of, speaking about the economy and politics and surveillance and, the injustices and how, how we're going to fix everything. I've been going to it for like 2 years. And then this year I actually had a panel because I was trying to connect, yoga and health to the economy. And so I gave a panel, not by myself. I had like 3 other people doing it with me, called Yoga and Simplicity Are in Direct Conflict or Enemies of the System. And I had, Bill Still, who's like a monetary guy. He makes really good documentaries on the monetary system. He's won like awards for best documentary. Like they can be found on YouTube, for free. Right. Like, so we need a healthy monetary system. We need healthy people, running things.
Yeah.
And
we're all walking around with traumatized nervous systems from horrible birth practices and being removed from the earth and, centuries of war and oppression. And yet this is a paradigm that we are evolving through. And I believe that we are moving from a paradigm that's been largely centered in the third chakra for the last 5,000 years to one that is more centered in the heart. And I see this happening all over through volunteerism, through alternative economics, through, alternative healing, through green energy, through the internet, through social systems and social networks. There's just so many examples of this new paradigm forming, and it's not coming from the top down. It's
right.
coming from the bottom up. It's a people's movement, the Occupy movement, that you were part of. That's all part of a people's movement to create something new that is based on more of a sense of equality and generosity and sharing the resources we have, and actually caring, is a big part of it. Caring about what happens 50 years from now with global warming, caring about what happens to someone on the other side of the globe, caring about what happens when New Jersey gets flooded by a hurricane. There is more caring about these things. There's actually less violence, less wars, less domestic violence than there ever has been, even though the news reports on it all the time and we, read about these terrible shootings and everything. If you compare it to the Middle Ages, in the Middle Ages, you weren't safe to walk down the street, Mm-hmm. And in parts of New York, you're not. But, most of it, you still can. And, we are progressing toward a more peaceful, heart-based, compassionate society. But it's a slow growth. And I think the third chakra power hold, is kind of having its last gasp and holding on for dear life. But they can't hold on. There's too many other people. The 0.1% or the 0.01%, as it really is, is very small. But get this, if we're talking about economics, the top 25 people who have the most income in the world, if they took 1/8 of their income, each one of them, and they have so much wealth that they wouldn't even miss it, that would be enough money to fix everything that's wrong in the world.
I know.
That was money to address global warming and deforestation and world hunger and birth control and, ocean acidification and all these things. I mean, 200 or 300 billion would address that. A fraction of what we spent on the Iraq war.
And it's not making them any happier.
No, that's the thing. It's not.
So what is it about the 1%? I mean, like, what are they missing? The top 0.1%. I believe that what they are missing is exactly what's right in front of them. Is helping these starving children. It would actually be bringing them the satisfaction that they're seeking.
Well, here's how I look at it. And I even wrote a blog about this, which is up on my website. This is around the time of the Occupy movement. You know, we are all the 1% in somebody's world. You know, if, you know, for me, and I don't, you know, I have an average income. I live decently, but I'm not wealthy. But if I drive by a panhandler on the street, the economic proportion between the panhandler and me is like the 1% to the rest of us.
Yeah.
And, you know, if we can't give $5 to the panhandler, we are no different than, you know, the millionaire executives that get, you know, 34 million for their bonus or whatever that can't contribute to a cause. It's no different. It's the same thing. And, you know, the panhandlers and the beggars are all over the street. And, you know, it's no more than a cup of coffee at Starbucks. You know?
Do you think that, you know, there's a lot of this talk about, you know, the banks and like they're too big to fail and they're too big to jail. So, I mean, there's not going to be a change, I don't believe, unless we actually really do challenge and resist those people and hold them accountable. And this idea that people can get so big, like they're so untouchable. And like a lot of times, like I've always kind of felt that exactly, like instead of going after the people that, you know, we should be kind of like going after and be holding accountable, you know, it's just easier for the little guy to kind of just abuse one another, you know, like the low hanging fruit. And so again, if we just took that energy, you know, like it's the people that do kind of keep it going a lot of times.
Well, sure. If we, you know, one thing that happened around the Occupy movement is there was this big movement of move your money. So people that had money invested in, you know, Wells Fargo and, you know, the bigger banks were encouraged to move their money into smaller local credit unions, you know, and there was a huge outflow of money from the banks during that time. Now, it's not so easily done because people have accounts and credit cards and their accounts are tied in with their business and yada, yada, yada. But there was, I think, like 10 million accounts that actually shifted their money. It was a huge outflow of money from the banks. You take money out of the banks and the banks fail on their own.
Exactly. So that's what, you know, I do the math over and over and over in my mind all the time. And it really is people not owning their power. And if we all really just withdrew our power, because we're, you know, we're the ones that keep these people propped up.
Yes.
You know, it's the people that just keep feeding, you know, and buying into. And I'm not blaming necessarily the people because the system is basically designed to keep people in debt. And it's almost like their innocence and their naivety is just being like taken advantage of.
Well, debt itself actually keeps people in debt.
Right.
If you borrow $100 from me and you have to pay me back 110, you've got to get that $10 from somewhere. You've got to take more than you were given, you know, and you have to give back more than you were given. So in a way, I think debt represents taking more than we're giving back. And yet it's a system that is running the economy. And, you know, some people propose a negative debt, you know, where it costs you money to hold on to your money, it costs you money to save it, and you can only avoid those penalties by spending it and keeping it in circulation. But I think we're quite off the topic of chakras.
Okay, so let's see. Well, let me see. Which one should we talk about?
But what I would say about chakras and all this is that chakras are the portals between the inner and the outer world. And what I see is there's a great division between, you know, some, not all, but some people who are only focused on the outer world through their activism and not paying attention to their inner world. And then on the other hand, the yogis who spend all their time on their mats and don't care at all about the outer world. And I think that the chakra system is a system that says what we do within affects the world without and vice versa.
Exactly. That was my next, I wanted to get into the whole, how does yoga fit into all of this?
Yeah, well, yoga means yoke. And it's how we yoke the individual with the divine, the individual with the soul of the world, self and other, mind and body, spirit and matter. And yoga gives us greater maturity, greater sensitivity, greater awareness. And as we evolve our consciousness, we have a different model. We have a different story that we're living by. And, but the thing is, when the West gets a hold of yoga, it makes it a fitness plan and it becomes a competitive, high money, multi-billion dollar industry.
That's right.
And instead of something, when I started in yoga almost 40 years ago, it happened in people's living rooms. They didn't even have mats. They practiced on towels,
Yeah, that's kind of, I got a little bit discouraged by that too, because since I left Omega and because I actually started to I learned yoga in the 80s, yoga and meditation in the early 80s.
Yeah,
before, before there was any kind of certifications, or I was doing personal training before there was any such thing as a personal training certification.
Yeah.
And, it's right, and now there's all kinds of, people are making up these, whatever, just turning it into this money-making, and it's just so unfortunate that everything that is supposed to be the cure for capitalism ends up catching the disease of capitalism.
Yeah, it's too bad. And you also, if you open a studio, then you probably borrow money to get it open. You borrow it at an interest. You have to pay it back. You've got to get you've got to get your students in there. You got to advertise. You got to do the whole business model, and it becomes an economic thing by sheer necessity. Yet, the fact that people can make money doing yoga. I mean, why should we pay people huge amounts to attend business seminars and not be willing to pay for something spiritual that can benefit us in the long run? So, I say it's okay that some finances get channeled into the yoga world because that makes more of it,
Yeah. I mean, right. I mean, as long as the person that's teaching it is really teaching the authentic, and not the gym yoga.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's always what I worry about. They want to just extract the philosophy out of it and just... But anyway, Anodea, I hope I can have you back on because, 45 minutes goes by really quickly.
It does.
And I have a bunch of other things I want to ask you.
Uh-huh.
But I have one more guest that's waiting.
Okay. Well, it's been a delight. And yes, it's a big world and a big change. And there's lots to talk about, especially in this connection between the inner world and the outer world.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, what is one thing that you want to tell people? I mean, I think meditation, I think you got to really sit in quiet and follow your breath and get in touch with yourself and not think.
Well, yes, we have to let go of what is in order to go to what's new. And we are facing the biggest evolutionary cusp that has ever happened on this planet, evolution 2.0, where it's not passive evolution, but we're actively participating in it. And this is something that we are all doing, and we evolve ourselves through meditation and yoga and through working with each other, and we evolve our systems on the planet, and we're all involved in a process of evolution. And everything that's failing is just the old way going out to make room for something new to be developed.
Right, because natural law is going to persevere over any man-made monetary system.
In the long run, it is.
Thank you so much, Anodea Judith.
Thank you very much. All right. Thanks so much. Till next time.
Sacred Centers. I'm just going to say your website is called Sacred Centers, Tools for Conscious Evolution.
That's right.
Okay. Bless you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
You're listening to Awake Radio. Straight talk for the awake and aware.
Okay, we are back from the break, and we have with us, just for a few minutes, Danny Schechter, the news dissector, who gave me my start on the radio, doing News Dissector Radio on the Progressive Radio Network for, I think it was like 3 years or so.
And
Dan,
here we are.
How are you?
You've gone on to bigger and better things. Great.
Yeah. Now I just need to start making the big bucks.
That's coming. That's coming. I'm sure about that.
So I saw you Saturday at the Left Forum at the NSA surveillance talk where William Binney, the mathematician, he was like, he made the codes for the NSA, and he was like a whistleblower for the NSA. And you had this brainstorm idea about reading Edward Snowden's documents on Broadway. Well,
basically, I'd like to see this issue get to a larger audience and a larger community where people can actually get more involved personally, as opposed to just waiting for the next article by Glenn Greenwald or the next interview. So my thought was to do what's been done before. It's not a new idea, but it was done with the Pentagon Papers, to actually have a public reading, to invite well-known actors, actresses, activists, whoever, to come see some of these documents and intercutting it, talk a little bit about this whole issue of NSA spying and what it means for our democracy. A lot of what's been discussed has been privacy. It's almost like it's an individual violation, but nobody's talking about the larger dimension of this, which is they're not just spying on Americans, they're spying on everyone in the world. And it's not right to just say, well, we don't want to be spied on and you're violating your rules because you're spying on Americans. No. We have to say this is not just a question of privacy. It's a question of human rights. It's a question of violating and abusing people's right to speak, to assemble, to become active, because the whole goal of surveillance is intimidation, and try to get people freaking out and frightened about communicating with each other. And I think that's part of why they're doing it on such a massive scale. I think they're very insecure. The latest economic figures that show that not only was there no growth, but there was negative growth in our economy. And what that means is that there's more and more discontent. People can't afford to live. They can't afford rents. It's hard to find a place to live. Here in New York, it's impossible.
And so, if I could just say, right, I mean, at a time where people are really feeling the need to speak out the most, they want to, of course, come along now and be spying on you like you're doing something wrong, which is ludicrous.
Well, it's part of a whole program of social control and management. It's not new necessarily, but it's certainly more pervasive than ever because the technology allows that. And the collusion between the government and big internet companies and telecom companies gives the NSA access to our communications on every level. And so they are not only spying on the internet and our phones, but they have this new facial recognition software where they're actually monitoring people in the street. I mean, it has very little, if anything, to do with terrorism. It has a lot to do with social control and political management. And that's why this has to be exposed as not simply, a violation of a privilege that we thought we had, that is to say, to be private, but also to recognize that this is a human rights issue.
And the thing is, I mean, like, they're the ones that need to be looked at. I mean, they're the ones that, we need to be watching. and they just keep like watching us more.
Absolutely. You
I
know,
mean,
Catherine, you and I were part of Occupy Wall Street. And when in writing about Occupy Wall Street, I wrote about actually what's happening on Wall Street itself, which is hundreds of cameras monitoring people walking by the stock exchange or being on the street, but very few cameras monitoring what's going on inside those investment companies, which involves all kinds of fraudulent transactions and practices, derivatives and the like, which really threaten the security, economic security of millions of people. So we need to know more about what they're doing for sure, and our media is playing a ho-hum role in bringing this material to our knowledge. That's why I think Greenwald, in his recent book, is not simply indicting the NSA, he's also indicting a lot of the mainstream media, which is not investigating these issues. And I think this is really what is the issue. You can't really have a democracy if people aren't informed. People can't be informed if the media they rely on for news and information isn't doing the job. And, you know, programs like yours, Catherine, or attempts I make to get on the air, our mediachannel.org, my website at newsdissector.net, all of this is an effort to offer news and information, other views, other perspectives that you're not exposed to in the what has been called the mudstream news. Okay.
Yeah. That's why I called this show Organic News, because, you know, I'm trying not to give people GMO news. I mean, I get
that. But it's not just news that we need to communicate. It's context, it's background, it's perspective, so that people really understand the meaning of the news that they're being exposed to. Most of us don't. It's all a big headline hit parade, you know. Obama does something, the Republicans attack him. It's a reflex. It's almost like a wrestling match. And unfortunately, that doesn't really create an informed citizenry. And that's what we need to do more of, is to try to offer perspectives like you're doing by having a variety of people, guests, who speak about the issues that they're passionate about.
Right. I just wanted to... the overreach of the people that already have so much just keeps spreading and spreading, and they just keep reaching and overreaching more and more, over the people that just have less and less. I mean,
that's true, and it's called inequality. It's a massive problem in our country, and it's growing in intensity.
Why don't more people stand up? Like, I just don't get it. I mean,
because where people are very insecure, they can't afford to lose what income they have, what pathetic income they have. They have so many bills to pay, so many debts to pay off.
See, but that's what I mean, though. But they're perpetuating it by doing what they're doing.
Of course, well, people, have a tendency and a propensity to try to safeguard themselves, and they do so by thinking what they're doing is making them safer, when in fact it isn't. Okay.
Well, that's just like being in an abusive domestic violence situation. I mean, okay, so you got a roof over your head and maybe some clothes and food, but you're getting beat up. So what are you going to do? Like, you're being
the problem is,
are you going to leave and risk maybe being homeless or something for a short while?
Fortunately, there are some support services. There are women's shelters. There are some ways to help and intervene.
Yeah, but a lot of people will never leave an abusive relationship. Like, they're so bound to the abuser, they'll never leave it.
But a lot of us have abusive and addictive relationships with media that is harming us, not really informing us, not really empowering us to do what's possible. So, it's a cultural set of issues, not just an economic set of issues. Yes, we have poverty, we have the rich and the poor, and the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, yes. But we also have a cultural, set of issues in our culture which prevent people from feeling strong enough or empowered enough to get together with others and to speak out. And that's really what we need to work on more and more. And that's why I like what you're doing.
Oh, great. Okay, so do you have a little bit, more about what you wanted to do on
Well, we
Broadway?
have my cousin David Schechter is a theater director. He's interested in shaping the production aspects of this, and we have to get together to try to make that happen. The World Can't Wait organization said they will be supportive of this. They have a track record of organizing big events. I want to do this in a way that reaches not just the people who are already convinced and already knowledgeable, but who reaches the rest of us, shows people that this issue connects to them too, and that this is a very dangerous situation that we're in right now in America with these technologies where you can't trust the privacy of your communications. You're at risk all the time, and to fight.
And the thing is, it's like it's your valid and legitimate behavior that they're going to just say it's criminal when it's actually not.
Yeah, we don't want to we just don't want to preach to people. What we want to do is we want to inform and educate them. I'm going to have to go now, Kat. I can't really stay with you. Maybe we can do this longer at another time. Thank you very much for having me on, okay?
All right, Danny Schechter, the News Dissector. Thanks for being with us. Okay. So, yeah, he just was on to give us a little bit about his idea. I would have liked to get a little bit more details. He said he wanted to have it on Broadway, so I guess that means like Broadway theater, not outside in the street or anything like that. But anyway, moving along, the next guest, Dan Johnson, 20-year-old founder of PANDA, People Against the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. It was signed into law by Obama, I believe, New Year's Eve of 2011, when nobody was paying any attention, which gives him the right to detain without due process American citizens if they even think you're a terrorist. Nationally renowned writer and speaker, he founded PANDA in January 2012, and it has since become the largest anti-NDAA organization in America, introducing or pushing over 18 pieces of state, numerous pieces of local anti-NDA legislation. A grassroots, nonpartisan, nonviolent organization, PANDA is supported by groups across the political spectrum invited to prevent the laws of war from being used here in the United States and on American citizens anywhere in the world. Dan has written several publications, including the Huffington Post, Policy Mike, Occupy.com, and Western Journalism. He has spoken at Paul Fest, the Northwest Ohio Conservative Conference, and the CRWF Northern Division Convention. I'm not sure what the CRWF stands for. Libertopia and Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Convention, and more, has been interviewed on numerous TV radio stations, including RT, Coast to Coast AM, Liberty Roundtable, and Red Ice Radio. So let's get to Dan Johnson. Calling him now. Hello?
Hello?
Dan?
I'm here.
Yay, welcome to Organic News here on Awake Radio. So I just read your bio to the people that are listening.
Great.
So yeah, the NDAA, I don't know if there's a lot of people that know what that is. I believe Obama signed it into law in, wasn't it New Year's Eve of 2011?
That's correct. It was just shy of midnight on 2011 in New York and New Year's Day in Hawaii, where the Obamas were vacationing as he signed the law.
And so, right, the National Defense Authorization Act gives Obama the authority to detain any American citizens they think is suspect of terrorism, but I mean that is a very vague. I mean that could be very vague. I mean it leaves the lines to be very blurry.
Well, it's close, and legally and specifically, what the 2012 National Defense Authorization Act, and first for your listeners who are not familiar with the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act funds the military. It's been passed every year. It's on its 53rd year this year. However,
did you say it funds the military?
It funds the military. Every year it's passed. It's on its 53rd year. So it's been passed for a very, very long time. However, as you mentioned, in 2011, the president signed into law two sections, Section 1021 and 1022, into the 2012 NDA as riders. And they're just kind of needles in a haystack that were snuck in there. And what these sections essentially do is they declare America legally a battlefield. This is important for your listeners to understand. When any area, when you apply the laws of war to any area, making it a battlefield, you negate any current law in that area. So in America, we have the Constitution as our current law, and we have the Bill of Rights and the defense of those rights. And what the 2012 NDA did was it made it an optional battlefield. So they can declare America a battlefield and you a terrorist at any point, or if it's one of their friends or their buddies, they don't have to declare it a battlefield and they can just leave it alone. That is not only extremely dangerous, as in it gives them the option to, say, fund the al-Nusra, a branch of al-Qaeda in Syria. Congress has funded them, and that is illegal under the 2012 NDAA. They can use the option to get away with it. But also,
can you just repeat? You said, what did you say about al-Qaeda?
Congress has sent arms and funding to al-Nusra, which is a branch of al-Qaeda in Syria. They, by doing so, this was probably about a year ago they did that, by doing so, they have violated the 2012 NDA and are subject to the Battlefield Clause. Now, what the Battlefield Clause allows them to do, and it's optional, again, and this is important to understand, it's a two-track court system now. They can put you in a military court or not give you a trial at all, or they could give you your civilian trial and let you run free. But let's say they decide to use the battlefield option on you or on an area of the country. That means they can detain you without trial, without charges, without a lawyer. They can execute you on the spot. This is what the debate, Senator Rand Paul at the U.S. Senate, when he was filibustering John Brennan's nomination, when he said that, well, they could use drone strikes on U.S. soil, he's talking about 2012 NDA. He's talking about the battlefield provision. They can do anything the military can do in a foreign country. Surveillance strikes, detention, execution, locking down entire cities. They can send the military in and do a mass detention. It doesn't matter. America is now considered a battlefield at their whim and at their discretion, and anyone here is subject now to the laws of war over the Constitution, which flips aside some 150 years of precedent that we do not allow the military to control our streets.
So I think it was 2 years ago already when it was the appeal hearings that they had in Lower Manhattan. I went and sat in a couple of times on those because I believe the initial hearing, Chris Hedges and Bruce Affron and Carl Mayer, the two lawyers, they won with Judge Catherine Forrest. I'm sorry, I think it's Forrester, and then the government appealed it, and that was the hearings I believe that I went to a couple of years ago, and she had said, Judge Forrester said to the government lawyer, asking him if they were already using it, like like it was almost going to come out in court that the government was already using it. Like they already are using it. They've already been doing it. And she was almost threatening to hold the government lawyer in contempt of court. And I don't know why she didn't.
And she should have. She absolutely should have held the government in contempt of court because they were nothing but in contempt of court. Exactly. You bring up an interesting point, though. When Judge Catherine Forrest asked, she's from the Southern District Court of New York, as you mentioned, when she asked, are you using these provisions in violation of my injunction? Let's take your listenership, who's not, or if they're not very familiar with the NDAA, let's take your listenership back to this lawsuit. This lawsuit was filed January 21st of 2012. In May, Judge Forrest heard the initial oral arguments, and the lawsuit says that the 2012 NDAA violates the First and the Fifth Amendments of the U.S. Constitution and is a danger to journalists, reporters, and activists. There is about 7 plaintiffs or so. And when they brought the case in front of Judge Forrest, she started asking the government several questions. She asked the government, well, okay, what's a belligerent act? Well, we don't know. Okay, so if someone writes a book, and in the front cover of that book they put, I support the political goals of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, and then the rest of the book is blank, could that person be considered a possible threat under the NDA? Could that person be detained? Well, we don't know, and we'll have to check with the laws of war, which was already key because they're acknowledging that they do have to check with the laws of war and not the Constitution. And she said, okay, go check with the laws of war, come back. And they continued to avoid her questions. Well, we can't tell you. Well, we don't know. I don't have a specific example. And basically the government made the case that they really have no clue what the sections mean or who they define as a threat.
Right.
But it just could be defined as anything at any time. And so Judge Catherine Forrest goes, well, all right, well, this is ridiculous, issues a temporary injunction. In her temporary injunction, she says that I am issuing this injunction for the public safety. In June, this is in May, in June of 2012, the government comes back with a letter that says we are, besides countering what the judge said, it said something very peculiar. We are interpreting this injunction to apply only to the named plaintiffs and not the public. So even though she said, I'm protecting the public, the government came back with a letter and said, well, we're going to reinterpret your decision to only apply to those 7 people who sued. And she wrote back, she fired back. I've never seen a judge so angry that she said, to put it bluntly, I did protect the public. And so the hearing came about in September, or August rather, where they had the final permanent injunction issued against the government. And remember that Obama, when he signed this, attached a signing statement that, he criticized Bush's use of signing statements, but he's using a signing statement here himself, which basically said that I have this power, but I'll never, ever use it.
Right. Yeah, give me a break. But meanwhile, he's appealing it so fiercely.
24 hours. 24
right.
hours. And you know that. I mean, you were following it. I've never seen an appeal that fast. I just haven't. Within 24 hours of the victory of Judge Forrest issued the permanent injunction saying you cannot use this. And that's also when she was asking, are you using this in violation of my injunction? When they refused to answer. And I used this example. I was on RT America last week. And I used this example there where I basically said, look, if you ask your child if they were in the cookie jar, and they kind of look at you and go, well, they were probably in the cookie jar. And when Judge Forrest asked the government, are you using this provision in violation of my injunction, they refused to answer. She should have absolutely held him in contempt.
Yeah.
She should have slapped contempt on him so fast. I don't know why she didn't.
See, I mean, if I could I just want to kind of pause right here just to make what I feel like is a really significant point. Because, I mean, they are so hard on us, and yet, no one is hard on them. And the more that we're not hard on them, the more we're giving them like that leverage to be and screw us. So, I mean, exactly. I mean, like, look at like all that they're doing to the people and just like stripping our rights, like left and right. And so why she didn't hold them in contempt? I mean, I can't, I don't know.
It really boggles my mind as to why, because I have to 100% give her credit. Her opinion was dead on. Her opinion matched the analysis of the Patriot Coalition, who we work with for legal stuff. Her opinion matched exactly what that was. Her opinion was absolutely dead on, and she issued the strongest ruling in favor of civil rights. So I really can't go after her too hard for not putting the government in contempt. But I am getting somewhat sick of this idea that we should hold the government in higher regard than the people who are supposed to own it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because it's like we do the same thing with the banks. I mean, we coddle them when, I mean, they're like completely out of control and they get coddled. And that's what I mean. Like, the more we do that, the more we're giving them that ability to just to abuse us, because they would do it to us. I mean, like that's just it. Like, we're not abusing them. We're just trying to defend ourselves, and we're all like afraid to do it.
Well, we have since Panda launched back in 2012, it's almost been 2.5 years, and actually it'll be 2.5 years the end of this month. And through just about 2.5 years of activism, until September of 2013, we did follow be respectful to your politicians and thank them and help them out and convince them and yada, 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 yada. And what we realized is we're speaking a whole different language. Because if you have an employee, right, let's say you own a grocery store, and it's very cliche to say that, well, politicians work for us, but it's well known in the United States that politicians should work for us. So let's take that to its logical conclusion. You run a grocery store, and you have employees who you hire to stock your supplies. You hire to stock cans, and they sit on the floor and they don't do anything. And then you say, well, stock my cans. And instead of stocking your cans, they run over to the shelves and they push your cans over and they knock over 4 rows of shelves, destroy probably $100,000 worth of product.
Yeah.
Do you then set up an appointment with them on their time using their cell phone and then sit down with them where they decide how long the meeting is, when to cut you off, and when they can meet with you? That's ridiculous. It shouldn't be you calling up the politician and trying to set up an appointment with them. It should be you calling up them and saying, hey, I'll be off of work in several hours. Come on over to my house. We've lost this idea that they work for you. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be polite, but if you're polite to your employees and instead they run around your grocery store destroying the entire place, you don't then just sit back and go, oh, well, okay, guys, I mean, I guess I elected you, so, whatever.
Right. It's it's like a codependent abuse, dysfunctional.
Stockholm syndrome. That is a great way to put it. It is Stockholm syndrome.
I mean, I was a psych major for these, for this very reason. I mean, before I knew anything about the Fed or the NDAA, I mean, it didn't take long. When I kind of think I was writing to you a little bit on Skype, like yesterday, about, like the dysfunction in the system in the, neighborhood growing up and everything is so tangible, is so, palatable. At such a young age, I could just feel it. And if you tried to talk about codependency or dysfunctional systems, I mean, I don't know. It didn't go over very well. I mean, I read tons of books about trauma, abusive systems and what happens to people in abusive systems. And that's exactly what happens when you're in an abusive system for so long. You bond to the abuser. And that's why I feel at the core of everything that's going on in our society is related to the dysfunctional family system, because people are used to that kind of relating. There's no other reason why people would tolerate it. If people grew up in healthy environments, with parents that were able to really teach them and raise them properly and teach them what to and what not to tolerate in life, obviously to me, there's just like no parents. There's no real leaders in the world, like helping people to be fit. And so in situations like this, people are so like, easily subjected to it because no one teaches them otherwise.
Well, since we're going off on a little bit of a tangent, I think, at least for me personally, and I want to challenge your audience to think about this. The biggest issue with the family in this country and the way people are brought up is, and it's not just this country, it's everywhere in the world. This is so prevalent, this is so normalized, that it's like seeing hair on a person's head. It just doesn't even register.
Yeah.
But I think, and I'll lay out a little bit of a case for it, that the biggest problem in America and around the world is we bring up our children on a moral double standard. Let me explain. If I run around the street and I flash a piece of tinfoil in your face and I drag you off to a cage, most of society would consider that kidnapping. Yet when I put on a costume, most of society considers that an arrest.
Right.
And that's okay.
Exactly.
If I run around foreign countries shooting people who look different than I do because I want their resources, and I would be considered a mass murderer and at some points a war criminal. If I put on a uniform or a really fancy costume, I'm considered a hero. And that's considered a meritorious Medal of Honor. What on earth kind of system are we bringing up our children in where we can say it's wrong to kill, but if you put on a uniform and work for the state, you can't. It's wrong to steal, but if you call it a tax and you work for the IRS, you can. It's wrong to injure and it's wrong to kidnap, but if you put on a costume and a piece of tinfoil and call yourself a police officer, you can. That is such a huge, because that double standard can then be applied to everything else. Humans work well within very serious, strict guidelines of self-interest. It's in my self-interest not for you to murder me, right?
Yeah.
And it's in your self-interest not for me to murder you. It's in my self-interest not for you to steal from me. It's in your self-interest not for me to steal from you. Therefore, these are inherent. But we bring our children up not on a moral basis, but we bring them up on a moral double standard. And what if we brought our children up on a moral basis? What if we just brought them up on a strictly moral basis, and we didn't bring them up on double standards. There was no double standards. If you shoot someone and it is not in self-defense, that is wrong regardless of what you're wearing, what you're doing, who says it's okay. You bring your children up with that moral standard, and I think crime would drop, the amount of criminals would drop, the society would take better care of each other. But I think, and this is just my personal opinion, but I think that the reason we have a lot of crime and a lot of societal problems in our country and around the world is because we raise our children up on a double standard that if you worship the state, it's okay to be violent.
So if I could respond, because like my theory of what you just said, and I agree with what you just said, and I attributed these problems to come from the fact that the monetary system has been completely diverted away from reality, and it's not based in any kind of reality. And so what that does is it forces people to abandon things that have real value that come from nature, like morals, like parents actually teaching their children something, and all they do is say to them, just go out into the world and make money. Like money is just the be all or end all. Like if you have money, like that's it. That's what I see a lot of. It's like no one, see, because we don't value nature. It's like we don't value things that come from nature. Right. Like, being a fit parent and actually teaching your kids something. Like to me, it comes down to fitness. I mean, real authority, you were describing the police, you were describing the military and the IRS and these people who put on uniforms so that they could abuse when, right, like the whole point of these institutions, the whole point of an authority, the whole point of a supposed leader, is to elevate people, is to raise people. But because everything has been contaminated by the monetary system, which is, has been hijacked away from those things, and everyone has been so conditioned to chase after money, it's taking everyone in a complete opposite direction. So if people just stayed connected to, nature and things that have real value, like morals and justice and raising your kids with some kind of, critical thinking ability, we wouldn't be in this mess. And exactly. So like, and it's a self-perpetuating situation that, once people get diverted, once they lose that connection to, to justice, to their sense of self-worth, it's kind of like bleeding out. It's like going into a state of shock. The more blood loss you experience, the more altered your mental status becomes, which then makes you make more choices, that perpetuates your blood loss, that makes you go into an even deeper state of altered mental status. So it's like, debt just keeps perpetuating itself.
And I think that I would maybe agree to a point. As far as money is concerned, absolutely, our current money has no more value than a bookmark. I mean, I'll go to shop at Meijer or Walmart or McDonald's, and I'll hand them the Federal Reserve note, and I'll just say to them, isn't it funny that we started accepting pieces of paper for everything, and that if I were to hand you if I were to go to my printer and hand you a white piece of paper, then would you accept that for your car? Well, no. Why? Well, then why do you accept this green piece of paper?
Yeah.
And just to get people to think about the loss of value. But I think an important thing to understand about money is money is part of a tripartite system of power. So you have money, influence, and authority. That's the tripartite system of power. If you have two of them, you will gain the other. But it all comes down to power. Money is a representation of your influence. Authority is legal power or lawful authority, lawful power, and influence is does not have to be an official position. Money is a representation of the influence you have. One of the things, though, that I think is the greatest ill of society, though the monetary system is a huge bit of it, is not so much the idea that we chase after value, because money shouldn't represent value, but it does. And so in the end, it's us chasing after value, which isn't a bad thing necessarily to chase after if we figured out that paper dollars weren't valued for anything. However, one of the greatest ills we have in this country is, catch myself using the word all the time, and it's so ingrained in everything, is this word society. What is a society? Define a society. Define your society. Nobody can. It's the conglomeration of people getting together and it's this abstract thing out there somewhere in the sky that we call a society. And instead of people doing things in their individual interest, which eventually leads to taking care of other people, because taking care of other people is in my individual interest. Take a JCPenney and a Macy's, for example. If you go into a JCPenney and you steal from that JCPenney, and then you come out and you go to Macy's, it's in both JCPenney's and Macy's best interest to make sure that Macy's knows when you steal from JCPenney's, and JCPenney's knows when you steal from Macy's, so they don't get stolen from each other, so they form a partnership. And it's in your best interest to take care of the people around you so that you will continue receiving and your family will continue receiving benefits from those people. Yet we have in this country and around the world this idea that we should contribute to society, that we should contribute to this abstract for the greater good, for the common good, whatever you want to call it. And by having this idea that we should contribute to the common, we should contribute to this abstract, somebody else can define that abstract. Very few people can define what your utopia is besides you, so you know how to create that. However, when we have this society, when we do things outside of our self-interest, what we've done is we've contributed to an abstract, and often it's governments and large entities like multinational corporations that define the abstract and what's good for everyone else. Because would you order higher taxes on yourself if you didn't want to pay higher taxes? No, of course not. Because it's for you. You know what's best for you. But you would order it on someone else because you think you know what's best for them, and odds are that's not what's best for them. And so I think that this idea that we contribute to a common good is a very dangerous notion because someone else can define the common good.
I don't necessarily agree that like people always know what's good for them or what's in their best interest a lot of times, you know, because I just feel like the system has really conditioned people to not, I mean, the idea is to definitely have people be able to, you know, to think and know what's good for them. But, you know, that's been pretty undermined for quite some time now. And
well, I agree that they don't necessarily know what's in their best interest. But if they can't even know what's in their best interest, on what crazy planet do we think that they could know what's in everyone else's best interest too?
Well, that's what I mean about like authority and lack of authority and leadership in the world, whether it's parents in the family system or a president or Congress and all that, is that no one is raising people. Like there's all these people being born into the world and not being really raised. They hear so much propaganda, their head is spinning, so that corporations can make money off of them and keep them, at that arrested development stage. And, and parents too. And then, parents are kind of a lot of times, teaching their kids sort of, the same thing. And, it's unfortunate that it's been so ingrained that all people do is just, get a job, make money, like, to pay your bills and not really kind of evolve like any further than that, as far as people being, raised to kind of really be like healthy and fit and critically think and be your own person kind of thing. So, again, like for me, it's just a matter of fitness, people living to their full potentials as opposed to just, being raised so far so that you just kind of like, right, keep the system going, but you don't actually benefit fully from it. And there are a lot of people waking up now that really are realizing that they're not benefiting from it, that, working for Walmart, who's like a bazillionaire 10 times over, and then they actually rob wages from their employees. I mean, it just doesn't get any more despicable,
Well, let's focus, because I enjoy tangents, but I want to finish up the NDA lawsuit timeline.
Definitely.
If we can. So coming back around to the NDA lawsuit timeline, we ended off where basically Forrest refused to hold them in contempt of court. And they basically say, we're using it, and they don't say it, but by not saying they're not using it, they're agreeing that they're using it. And then it goes to the appeals court. And the appeals court rules against the plaintiffs, but they don't rule on the NDAA. They rule on standing. And they basically say, because you haven't been indefinitely detained without a trial, you can't bring this case to trial to challenge the NDAA, which is a really silly catch-22, if you think about it.
Yeah, that wasn't Judge Forrest in that part of it, right?
Right, that was the second level. So we went from district to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. And the appeals court just said, you don't have, it's not that, we're not going to look at the law. We're not going to say the law is good or the law is bad. We're just saying that you don't have standing to challenge it. And then they appealed to the Supreme Court.
And so wait, what did they base that appeal? Say that again.
The law. It was a 60-some-odd page opinion, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. But the long and short of it is, because you haven't been indefinitely detained. They're talking to the plaintiffs. Because you haven't been indefinitely detained without trial yet, then you can't bring this case to trial to challenge the NDAA.
Well, that makes absolutely no sense. So you're supposed to wait until you get indefinitely detained? I mean, that sounds like absurd.
It is absurd, but that is the way the people in black robes, I'm not even going to give them the rank of judges, that's the way the people in black robes on the Second Circuit decided to rule. And because we have this silly idea that we must hand off our rights to an oligarchy before we figure out what they are, then they appeal to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court does not rule on the constitutionality of the law, does not rule on standing. It just simply says, no, we're not going to look at it. We're just denying your case from ever making it up to the Supreme Court. And in doing so, they've essentially said, hey, Congress, whatever you guys want to do, and executive branch, whatever you want to do, man, completely up to you. So it's not going to be won at the court level, and that's what happened with the lawsuit. The lawsuit failed. It failed at the Supreme Court level. It failed at the appeals court level. And that's what happens when you try to protect your rights inside a box put together by people trying to take away your rights.
Exactly. So this is what I'm saying. Like, it's, I always think of, of an example of, like doing your laundry in like dirty water. I mean, so all they did, I guess, by trying to pursue this lawsuit was just, seeing how dirty the water is, and
it was
dirtier, the higher up you go.
And it does, and don't get me wrong, it was helpful. The lawsuit was very helpful to our efforts. We weren't directly involved in it. My and our legal counsel's opinion was the lawsuit was not strong enough and did not challenge enough of the amendments of the Constitution, plus did not have a strong enough roster to actually challenge the NDAA's detention provisions effectively. But so we weren't involved in it, though we had the chance to be, and we decided just to stay out of it. But their lawsuit proved that Supreme Court and the federal level is not where it's going to be. It's just not going to be solved by the federal government, which is not surprising because the federal government is perfectly okay with the president assassinating American citizens, why would they now just change their mind on indefinite detention of those same people?
And so where the NDAA stands now, it's in effect?
That is an interesting question, and I want to take the time to fully answer it. In the 1942 era, when we had the attack on Pearl Harbor and the Japanese Americans were, you remember Executive Order 9066, where the Japanese Americans were detained without trial.
Yeah.
Well, what many people don't know about that order is it was a legal fix for what he was already doing. FDR declared martial law in Hawaii and detained 1,000. I didn't even know this till like a month ago. FDR declared martial law in Hawaii and detained 1,000 Japanese Americans without charge or trial before 9066. He put that in place to make it legal after the fact, and then continued to use it.
Right. Retroactive.
Retrograde, retroactive. Yeah. So what we're seeing now is we're seeing the same pattern, because this goes back to the Bush administration. When in 2005, the Bush administration was sued by one of the Guantanamo detainees, Yasser Hamdi. Yasser Hamdi was an American citizen. And he said, you can't detain American citizens. That's against the Constitution. Here's my habeas corpus petition. Deal with it. And then that case goods its way up to the Supreme Court. In front of the Supreme Court, the Bush Justice Department made two arguments. The first argument was that they could detain him under the 2001 Authorization for Use of Military Force, which says nothing about American citizens, has to in order to apply here in this country, or to apply to American citizens anywhere in the world. But that aside, they argued that the 2001 Authorization for Use of Military Force allowed them to detain Hamdi. They secondly argued that under Article 2 of the Constitution, Bush had the plenary authority as a commander-in-chief to detain Hamdi. The Supreme Court said, we agree with your first argument, so we're not going to talk about your second, which means they agree that the AUMF allows them to do everything in the 2012 NDAA, and they don't disagree with the president's claim that under Article 2 of the Constitution, they can do everything under the 2012 NDAA. And that was the Obama administration's argument in court in front of Catherine Forrest before the oral arguments was, why are you challenging the NDAA? We could already do this to you under other laws. So, number one, is the NDAA detention provisions in effect? Absolutely, yeah. They're not struck down by any court. But number two, does it matter? And the answer is no. It does not matter. Until Congress or enough states or enough cities actively prohibit, instead of just pull their assent, if they just say, well, Congress no longer believes this covers American citizens and people here in the United States, then they remove their consent. And that's what there were two bills this year that were going to do that in Congress. Both failed, which is, in a weird way, good they failed, because they did not they only removed Congress's consent. They did not prohibit the president from doing this. And until Congress or the states or the cities across America prohibit the president from using this authority under any law, anywhere, anytime,
But he doesn't
these
have
laws will still be in effect.
Right. I mean, he doesn't have the authority to do it without Congress. I mean,
Congress gave it to him. Under the 2001 Authorization for Use of Military Force, Congress ceded all war-making power in the war on terror to the president. So
Right.
they said, you don't have to come to us anymore.
Oh my God.
Yes.
So okay, so they're not doing their job then.
Of course not.
I mean, so I don't I mean, this is what I'm saying. It's like such a breakdown. It's like a complete breakdown. I mean, then they're not real Congress people.
Your entire federal government isn't doing its job. I mean, where do you draw your line? When your federal government says under the 2012 NDAA, we declare America a battlefield, which means we can detain you without trial, without access to a lawyer, without access to an attorney, which means we can execute you without a trial, without access to a lawyer, without access to your family, which means we can lock down entire cities, again, without a trial, without anything. And when you have a Washington Times article that came out, regardless of what you think or do not think of the Bundy situation, the Washington Times article noted that a senior White House official stated the Obama administration considered but rejected using military force against Bundy and his supporters. Considered using military force against people on American soil. Where do you draw your line at that point? Your government claims the authority to kill you. They claim the authority to jail you. They claim the authority to take over your town. Where else is there you going to draw your line and say, yeah, they're no longer legitimate?
Well, exactly. I mean, well, you're going to have to ask the American people, like, how much more abusive does it have to get? I mean, how much more willing? I mean, so just like if you see something, say something here in the New York City subway and, oh, the NYPD has a right to, you know, to check your bags on the subway, which I can't stand those announcements. And I mean, you know, I don't know if a lot of people, you know, have this idea like, oh, well, you know, if it's going to protect me from terrorism, like, sure, I'll let them check my bag. I mean, so, I mean, when does it become clear that the terrorist is like your own government if they're the ones taking your rights away while calling you a terrorist the whole time?
Well, let's take that on. Let's take on this quote-unquote threat of terrorism. This threat of terrorism, let's just go by the numbers. A lot of people who criticize the war on and the excesses in the war on terror still grant terrorism a lot of power and a lot of threat that I really don't think it has. See, you are 17,000 times more likely to die of cancer than a terrorist attack. Right. You are 12 times more likely to accidentally suffocate yourself in your sleep than die in a terrorist attack. You are 8 times more likely to be killed by a police officer than a terrorist. So all this war on terror threat, you're 1,000 times more likely to be killed in a car accident. So if indeed 17 in 1 year, the year that these statistics were taken was 2011, 17 Americans around the world were killed in terrorist attacks. More people have been killed when their TV fell on them than in terrorist attacks. So why do we even consider to give this threat of terrorism any credence? And secondly, let's look at how it's being used.
And how many people have died from drone attacks from the United States?
Well, not even focusing on what the United States is doing and whether or not they are the terrorists. Let's focus on some of the people that they are calling in court terrorists. Now, luckily, these people are getting a trial. It's only a matter of time until they're not, but luckily they are getting a trial. However, it's a show trial, usually, and it is... let me just quote a few examples. Justin Carter and Cameron D'Ambrosio. Cameron D'Ambrosio, 18 years old, lives in Methven, Massachusetts. Shortly after the Boston bombing, he rapped about it. Now, do I think rapping about a national tragedy a day after it happens is a dumb idea? Yes, absolutely. Do I think it deserves 20 years in prison?
20?
No. I don't think that a rap deserves 20 years in prison. Yet, because they called him a terrorist, that's what they charged him with. He was acquitted by the jury. The second young man I'm going to talk about was not so lucky. Justin Carter, Austin, Texas. He was playing League of Legends with a few friends, which for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a massive online game. You play with people all across the world. And he's playing League of Legends. Shortly afterward, a friend calls him insane. He responds with, quote, "Oh yeah, I'm real insane. I'm going to go shoot up a school full of kids and eat their still beating hearts." Now, I consider that sarcasm. I'm a Yankee. I'm sorry. That's really dark sarcasm, but it's sarcasm nonetheless. However, a Canadian woman reported him to the authorities in Austin. They showed up at his house. They are charging him with terrorism. They brought him to jail on $50,000 bail. Now, to give you an idea, not to cut you off, I do think this is important to understand how they went after this. 18 years old, okay? He's basically a kid. I'm 20, so I can say basically a kid. 18 years old. So, 18 years old, $50,000 bail for a Facebook comment. Now, to give you an idea, in Nevada, you have $2,500 bail for a DUI. So for almost killing people on the road, you have $2,500 bail. For a Facebook comment that somebody calls terrorism, you have $50,000 bail.
Wait, you said $50,000 bail? Or
$50,000. So an anonymous donor came up with $50,000 when his story went international. He was beaten up in prison. He was pretty badly mangled. And the judge, he's not been sentenced yet. He has not had his hearing yet. The judge refuses to stop prosecuting.
Oh, my God.
This is what happens when you give the government the authority to say, well, this group of people does not have rights. We call them terrorists, or we call them saboteurs, or we call them Irish Catholics, or we call them Japanese Americans, or we call them blacks, or we call them Filipinos, or we call them Chinese. This group of people does not have rights. And because you think it's not me, you're like, oh, well, that's okay. Well, guess what? It is you. Department of Homeland Security report released January 31st, 2012, called the START Report, Hotspots of U.S. Terrorism. You can find it on our website at pandaunite.org. If you look under resources, it's under Who is a Terrorist. This is just one example. A quote from that report defining the next wave of terrorism. Quote, people or groups who are reverent of individual liberty, suspicious of centralized federal authority, and believe in conspiracy theories that involve grave threat to national sovereignty and or personal liberty, close quote, U.S. Department of Homeland Security.
I wanted to, if I could just interject, I just wanted to say that, again, going back to the monetary system and the fact that, just like corporations need resources, like they just need to keep fracking, they need to keep cutting down trees. These institutions like the CIA and the NSA, in order for them to continue to function just like a corporation, they need resources. They need terrorists, so they're going to create them, even if there are none. And that's what I think this whole war on terror is really all about. It's not about getting terrorists. Half the people that they call terrorists in these other countries are people that are basically just trying to defend themselves against this country, blowing up innocent people over there.
Well, let's say that the United States calls people terrorists, and they continue to use this word for a very, very long time. The point, and I think the point that I would really like your audience to understand, to take to heart, is it doesn't matter what they call you. Because you know what? The next level is going to be pedophiles. That's what they're going to start calling people who are dissidents. They're going to start calling them pedophiles. They're going to start calling them child kidnappers. They're going to start calling them rapists. They're going to start, okay, so they're going to come up, they'll switch terms. They've been switching terms all throughout history. They'll switch terms again. And I think the point that I really would like your listeners to consider is that maybe when you allow them to create a category that has no rights, that has no right to a trial, that has no right to an attorney, that has no right to free speech, when you allow the government or a corporation or a powerful entity to create a category of people that has no rights, maybe and just maybe they didn't create that category for those people, they created that category for you. They created that category for everyone they consider a threat. And the minute you could just trip a senator on accident on your way to work, and that could be enough for the government to label you a threat and go after you. And so,
I mean, so that then when you use the word threat, I mean, you mean you really mean a threat to their exposing their, you know, their scam and their complete overreach. Like,
I mean a threat to their power, however you do it.
But that does exactly, like, a threat to their power doesn't make us a terrorist. It means that we're just, like, naturally trying to keep their overreach in check. Exactly, like, but they've expanded so much, and they've developed, like, so much momentum and so much, you know, arrogance that, right, us putting them in check is they're going to see us as a terrorist. I mean, but that's not an accurate definition of a terrorist, and that's not an accurate definition of a terrorist overseas either. I mean, maybe people overseas have more sense than Americans do to put this country in check, and the people who have a gigantic overreach in check. And, you know, all they're doing is responding in self-defense, and that doesn't make someone a terrorist.
It doesn't make someone a terrorist, but I think that the best thing we can do at this point to expose this word, terrorism, is number one, is to show everyone that if you allow a group to be stripped of their rights, that group will eventually become you. And number two is to use the word terrorist nonchalantly, is to inject it in everyday conversation just as the government wants us to describe everyone, except it's not a threat. Except, oh yeah, I just paid with cash. I'm a domestic terrorist. You're what? Well, the government defined it this way, and here you go. Expose the paper tiger of terrorism. If you expose the paper tiger of terrorism, and then you keep in mind and you apply that to your daily life, that every group has rights and you cannot take them, you have no right to take them, regardless of what the government calls that person, they are innocent until proven guilty. If you remember that, then it doesn't matter what they call people in the future, and we can expose the paper tiger of terrorism and then the paper tiger of this group doesn't have rights, but everybody else does.
Well, okay, we only have like a couple of minutes left, but I just wanted to say, I mean, but that's what I'm saying. Like, that's what they do to justify keeping their scam going is, I mean, you know, like, what's to stop anybody from calling anybody anything? I mean, I could call somebody something. I mean, so that's what they use to justify, you know, again, people in Afghanistan. Like, I mean, we can just call them anything. Just, you know, just because they're a Muslim or whatever doesn't make someone a terrorist. I mean, and so by reducing people and seeing them as like subhuman, then they use that as an excuse to abuse people. I mean, that's why they call people things, is so that they can then, that's like the green light to just trample all over people's rights. But the whole point about, again, being in a position of authority is supposed to be, you know, lifting people up. So like this is where the line is drawn, is that even if someone, you know, is a terrorist or commits a crime, you still treat that person with due process. And I mean, like, the whole point would be to, you know, I mean, I don't want to necessarily use the word rehabilitate, but, you know, treating people like shit, is not going to help that person. Like that's what I'm saying. It's almost like a clear perpetuation. Like they clearly want to perpetuate their scheme, because even if someone is a terrorist, you don't torture them. You don't. That doesn't mean that we have a right to just completely take people's rights away, because that's only going to keep perpetuating and not turn the system around in a direction that we need to start moving in.
And that indeed is the ultimate point, is you cannot take rights away from anyone. You shouldn't take rights away from anyone, because eventually those rights will be taken away from you. And so I know we don't have much time left. If people want to get engaged in the fight for their liberty, fight for their freedom, if they care. If you don't care, don't bother. You're going to waste your time. But we are activist trainers. We're happy to help you take back your town or take back your city from the NDAA. And our website is pandaunite.org/takeback. pandaunite.org/takeback. You'll find a packet of information there to help you take back your town. You lead, but we're here to help, and we're here to make sure that your town does not allow itself to become a battlefield, that it is a peaceful city like one county and 6 cities have already done.
And just mention really quickly what's going to be happening in Albany, a concert?
Absolutely, yeah. In Albany, New York, this Saturday, if you want to come up, we're going to have hip-hop legend Immortal Technique, Saving Abel, and a bunch of other local bands, including Stellar Young, in Albany, New York, June 7th, the Washington Avenue Armory. TakeBackTour.com for tickets. Go and click on the Albany seal at TakeBackTour.com. Tickets are right now $25 or $30 pre-sale, and they'll be $35 at the door. But we are holding a concert to educate people on the NDAA and to change the culture ultimately.
Thank you so much, Dan Johnson. Everybody, thank you for tuning in to Organic News here on Awake Radio, and we'll see you again next Tuesday. And power to the people.
Thanks for having me on. Bye.
Okay. Take care, Dan.